Welcome to the Tech Meets Mental Health interview series. I'm Sherry Marion. In this series, our host, Professor Skip Rizzo, will be engaging in dialogue with various experts in the digital mental health field across the course of the series. Today, Professor Rizzo will interview today's amazing speakers, Dr. Patrice, Tamar, Weiss, and Dr. Naomi Gefen. They're specialists in the field of virtual rehabilitation technology for children and adults with motor and cognitive impairments. The Tech Meets Mental Health series is presented by Cognitive Leap. Cognitive Leap is a pioneer in the area of digital diagnostic and therapeutic systems designed to address ADHD and other cognitive and mental health conditions, leveraging advances in virtual reality and using mobile web-based applications. Cognitive Leap takes a human-centric, clinician-driven approach to create and deliver assessment and intervention tools. Our company has a strong research and development team with world-renowned experts who focus on neurology, cognition, psychology, engineering, and artificial intelligence. We have completed and submitted our clinical research on an FDA study for the approval of our virtual reality classroom diagnosing ADHD in children. Our expert in virtual reality and today's host is Professor Skip Rizzo. Skip Rizzo is a professor at USC and director of medical virtual reality. He serves as an advisor and chief science officer for Cognitive Leap, exploring methods to address attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children. Joining Dr. Rizzo today is Professor Patrice or Tamar Weiss. Professor Weiss is an emeritus professor at the University of Haifa and the executive research advisor of the Helmsley Pediatric and Adolescent Rehabilitation Research Center, PARC, at Al-Ain Children's Hospital in Jerusalem, Israel. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy from the University of Western Ontario, a master's studies in kinesiology, University of Waterloo, and a PhD in physiology and biomedical engineering, McGill University. Originally from Toronto and Montreal, Professor Weiss moved to Israel in 1991 to a position at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In 2001, she established the Laboratory for Innovations in Rehabilitation Technology at the University of Haifa, where she developed and evaluated novel virtual environments, haptic interfaces, co-located and online technologies to explore the effect of individual telerehabilitation and collaborative platforms for a range of children with autism, ADHD, DDC, ABI, etc., and adults, SCI, ABI, ALS, and stroke with cognitive and motor impairments. During the early to mid-2000s, our host, Dr. Skip Rizzo, was invited to Israel on a number of occasions where he mentored Professor Weiss and her research team in many aspects of virtual reality for rehabilitation. Her research has been funded by many national and international agencies. She has co-edited 2 books, authored more than 250 peer-reviewed journal articles, proceedings, and book chapters, and delivered numerous keynote addresses at international conferences. Professor Weiss is a founding board member of the International Society for Virtual Rehabilitation and the 2017 recipient of its Distinguished Career Award. Her major activities over the past 3 years have been to co-establish PARC and support its principal investigators and their research teams in her capacity as the executive research advisor. Dr. Naomi Gefen is the Deputy Director General of Al-Ain Hospital Pediatric and Adolescent Rehabilitation Center in Jerusalem since January 2012, and is responsible for the allied health clinical services, including occupational and physical therapy, speech and language pathology, psychology, social work, and education. She is a principal investigator in the Al-Ain Pediatric and Adolescent Rehabilitation Research, or PARC Center, where she heads the domain of novel technologies for children with motor and cognitive impairments. Dr. Gefen is an occupational therapist with 30 years of experience, specializing in assistive technology, medical devices, powered mobility, and telerehabilitation for children with disabilities. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees in occupational therapy from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, master's degree in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School, as a 2008 Wexner Israel Fellow and a PhD from the University of Haifa. Dr. Gefen has been involved in the development of new services, such as the national website of assisted technology, safe transportation for children with disabilities, and the Aline-powered mobility lending program. She recently won the ISVR's Early Career Award. During the interview, our participants who are joining from the webinar can directly ask a question through the Q&A window, while participants from the YouTube live stream can also ask questions in the live chat. We will have around 10 minutes at the end to answer your questions. Let's turn it over to Dr. Rizzo and Professors Weiss and Gefen.
Okay, well, that was quite a mouthful of historical background on everyone. And I just can't say how much I've been excited looking forward to this, because we had this plan about a month and a half, 2 months ago to do this. And it just happened that, you know, these tragic, horrific events have happened in Israel that makes, I think, this conversation more relevant to what the heck is going on. And, you know, how does some of the work that we've been putting all our lives into, how is it relevant and so forth. We'll get into that as we move forward. I also want to correct one point. I didn't mentor Tamar. It was a co-mentorship thing. Tamar enabled me to do a lot of great things, and particularly in my times in Israel, which are very memorable, and I think back with great fondness. But it was a mutual collaborative experience. I just want to set that record straight. So anyway, Naomi, we haven't had that much conversation before, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit more as we go through the conversation today. But why don't we just start off with each of you, just, you know, take a minute or two, whatever it takes, just to describe, you know, your history and what you're doing, what gets you all fired up to get out of bed in the morning each day, and so on. So
Naomi, go ahead.
Well, I will actually connect to the point that you said about mentor, because Tamar is my mentor. And so she started at the University of at Hebrew U in 1991, and I was doing my bachelor's. So that's when our paths met. And it's because of her that I actually got into the area of technology. Continued on with a master's with her and the PhD as well. So technology is something that gets me out of bed in the morning. And it's definitely something that I'm very excited about, specifically about powered mobility and enabling children to move independently, run around in circles in their chair, run away from their parents in the chair, and just let them behave as children as they really should. So I think that's something that really gets me out of bed in the morning, as you said. So yeah.
So I would, obviously, I've enjoyed tremendously working and being inspired by Naomi throughout the years. It has been a privilege. And in fact, we've come full circle, because it was through my connections to her that I was able to now leverage my formerly primarily academic career into what I'm doing now at the hospital. I would like to actually just focus on two little points, I think, that really made technology the choice for my career. One was shortly after I graduated from OT, when I was kind of looking for what to do and what ways to do it. And at the time, I mean, you know, obviously you can see from my appearance that I'm not exactly a spring chicken. So at the time, OT really was not as developed as it is now. And I wasn't really satisfied with the career path that I had chosen. And you know, little known to me, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were, tinkering around in their garage, and they came up with the Apple IIe, which had a firmware card in it. It was like an actual physical card that was inside the computer. And it was the very, very first time that you could connect different kinds of assistive technologies, switches, and all sorts of things for people that were very seriously motor impaired. And it just opened up the whole world of being able to do something in a concrete way that had a real impact on people's lives. And I just never looked back from that. And I followed their careers, as well as many, many other innovations that happened since then. And then I arrived upon a wonderful conference in Sardinia. I believe it was in the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken, Skip, where who is there on the stage? You can't get him off because he has so much to share. Dr. Skip Rizzo, who was accompanied by his father. I think this was like a homecoming trip to Italy. And I just thought, oh gosh, I've got to get to know that guy. And there is no way that this was a two-way mentoring, Skip. I mean, we invited him to come. He spent a week and we vacuumed out his knowledge from his brain. And he really brought us into the world of virtual reality. So taking this, my own inherent interest in technology, but now seeing all of the amazing things that could be done with it. So those were really two highlights of my career. Like men involved in technology, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Skip Rizzo set the tone for me.
Well, so, what would you say, each of you, was the spark, the pivotal moment when you saw a technology application? And I mean, Tamar, you've described a little bit about the early influences, but was there one thing that really, lit the fire?
I'll let Naomi go first and then
I think for me, I was a student. I was doing my bachelor's degree in occupational therapy, and I had field clinical work, and I was doing it at a place that had assistive technology and power mobility. And I was told, okay, I mean, you need to learn more about the technology. And a little kid came in, and I started working with the child. I put the child on a powered wheelchair, a very young child, I mean, 2 or 3. And the look in the child's eye, I think it was a child with SMA, if I remember correctly, and there was no independent mobility at all. But the look in the child's eye, being able to look at the parent and being a child and just like, wow, I can get away from you, or wow, this is something that I can do all by myself. So I think that was like the spark that said, wow, I mean, being able to give children technologies that enable them to do things by themselves, I think is just something that is it's just amazing, because the kids they're willing to try anything, and the parents sometimes are more reluctant, and once they see how much it gives to their children, then usually they'll go along with it.
I just got to interject here. When I think about some of my early experiences that drove me into this, it really started. I was working clinically in a brain injury rehab center, and one of my clients came in with a Game Boy around 1990. And this is when we're using a lot of workbook, paper and pencil, cognitive rehab activities. And he goes, Skip, look at this thing. And I go, what is it? And he goes, it's a Game Boy. And I go, what does it do? And he started playing with it, and he was glued to it. This is a kid that you couldn't motivate for more than 5-10 minutes on a traditional cog task. But here he was glued to this gamified application, playing Tetris, visual spatial type thing. I'm not sure how much Tetris would transfer to everyday functional activities. Really the focus of OT is how you have it make a difference in real world stuff. But that was the first spark. But the second spark related to your story was I saw Dean Inman in 1994 present at the international, my first VR conference. I think I went in 93, but 94, he presented on motorized wheelchair training with very young children. And he had the wheelchair on a set of rollers. And I've got a great video of it. It kind of shows, it kind of shows how primitive the technology was, but how engaging it was in spite of the relatively impoverished graphics, where the kid could go through these obstacle courses and learn how to navigate this motorized vehicle, essentially. Yeah. And then the thing that got me, though, was the reward at the end when the kid successfully completed a trial. Then he'd get to fly off the world and fly in these clouds. And it was like, damn, that's what I got to do. So we have a shared spark there. Tamar, what about you?
My view of this actually is a little bit more of a roller coaster than the two of you are describing. like I go really high and I get all excited and I see this new development that's come out. And then I see, and this is actually had been the topic of our original idea about what we would talk about today, which was that gap between what you see being published and shown in research and at conferences and these really great videos. And I'm not at all suggesting that those videos are not real. But then when you actually see clinicians and children and the family members trying to do it on a day-to-day basis, and there's such a gap. And just one statement that I've made every year when I've taught assistive technology and different kinds of virtual reality techniques for more than 30 years. Since my first class I ever taught was in 1980, and I have made the same statement since then, which is that in 5 years we are going to see robotics used in clinics on a daily basis. And so what are we now? We're now, 43 years later? And I'm not saying that there are no robotics out there, but they're not on a daily basis in a clinical situation. So I'm excited each time, but then I get this huge letdown from the other side of the downside of the roller coaster on it. So, and I don't quite know how to handle that.
Well, this is hope. I think we see that there's so much potential in the technology, and in some ways we're making a difference. Like the bar over traditional methodologies is not that high. And even if we only make 10-15% improvement over that, we're still making an advance. And we always know that the technology is going to continue to improve. I think with robotics, it's still quite challenging because you've got a lot of
hardware. You've got the hardware.
A lot of hardware.
Yeah.
Now we've seen it with the VR where, the things that we dreamed about in 2020 and 2020, there were good ideas, but the technology wasn't there to deliver on them. And now where you start to see standalone headsets that are $300-400 that have the capacity of a $10,000 headset 10 years ago. You're seeing wearable sensors, interface devices. You're seeing that movement towards what is the real challenge here, I think, and that is helping clinicians to adopt the technology. All our papers and our best demos, our videos are always our best demo stuff, but the pragmatics of getting it in the clinic and teaching our people our folks in the trenches. Yeah, that is the big challenge we're facing now, because the technology's caught up with the vision, the cost has come down. We got a decent scientific basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have seen some wonderful examples that, for example, at Aline Hospital, Naomi's work with powered mobility is something that is used. She'll tell you about it, but, Naomi, all of your simulator work that you've done in collaboration with researchers from McGill University and a company called Gravity. And we have a motion analysis laboratory that is used on a daily basis for clinical work. So it is possible, but it's just not yet, I would say, routinely done.
Right.
I think one of the things that makes the difference is if technology is adopted is if you have the person that's crazy for it, if you have that therapist that really wants to use it, or if you have someone in a position that they are the go-to person. Just recently now, over the past couple of weeks, because of what's going on here, we've been transferring to telerehabilitation. And one of the barriers was, well, what's going to happen with the technology? And if I get stuck and the therapy session is going to be cut short. And so we adopted the model of having someone, a technology champion, so that he's the go-to person. So if anything goes wrong, he knows the technologies and he can really help the therapist. So if the barrier was the fact that I won't know how to use it or I'll get stuck on it, and anyway, the therapy time is limited, this really gives them the confidence that they won't get stuck. And I think that makes a big difference. And being able to identify within a staff people that are more keen to use technology and not maybe not all the technology, but specific ones, and they can be the ones that can transfer the use of it to the other therapists.
Yeah, and I think also to adapt the therapy goals so that they, you can't probably accomplish everything because you're not there on site with the child to be doing the manipulation and the handling. So you may not be able to, for example, support his balance needs at that particular time, although there is a parent at the same end as he is at home with him. But you can adapt your goals so that you could perhaps work on other things. Like, we've had some examples where the people will take canned goods out of a cupboard, and those are weights, and that you can, do this kind of mimicking even through simple technologies such as Zoom. And so we found that our experience during Corona really bridged an important gap. We went from almost no usage of telerehabilitation to total rehabilitation. And in a way, I mean, I hate to say this because, Corona was so difficult for so many people, but there were some silver linings. And one of them was the fact that it forced us to adopt technology usage. And I'm going to give a shout out now to my own siblings. I don't know if they're online or not, but, we've been using Zoom ever since because it was really the only way. I couldn't visit them in Canada for the whole time of the COVID period. And it encouraged us to use technology. And that we found that also in the clinic. And now in our own personal war situation here in Israel, we're much more adept at it because of that COVID experience.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there. I think where we are with tele-rehab or teletherapy is 5 years. It would have taken 5-7 years to get to where we are now if it hadn't been for COVID. Never let a good crisis go to waste. I think Winston Churchill said that. And you've got to take advantage of situations that might move people towards something that they would be hesitant to, even if they didn't have well-formed reasons. I mean, I know in clinical psychology, there was always a question, can you do trauma-focused therapy online? Do you have to be in the same room? And it took a decade of people doing that kind of teletherapy to deliver exposure therapy to find that, in fact, you could do it safe and ethically with selected patients. And it broke down some of the barriers to care because you've got a lot of clients in the United States. You've got a lot of clients, as they refer to in the VA, as in frontier areas. They're far away from care facilities. So, yeah. So Naomi, what about what Tamar was mentioning? Can you give us a little more on what you're doing with kids and mobility?
One of the things that that during my work with assistive technology and the research was the fact that I really wanted things to be available also at home and not only in the labs, because we read about it in the articles about these wonderful programs or devices that people are using in research in the lab. But then if the kids aren't in the lab or they can't have access to it. So we have at our hospital since 2009, actually, a powered mobility lending program where we lend out powered wheelchairs so that kids can practice and become proficient, and then they can be referred to the Ministry of Health and get their own powered wheelchair. We bought 21 chairs, but the waiting list kept getting longer and longer because everyone heard about it and they wanted the option to practice. Because it's kind of like, if they can't practice, then they can't become proficient, and then they won't get a chair. So in 2016, I came to Tamar and said, okay, now it's time that I should do my PhD. And so she said, okay, so what are your ideas? So we started talking. And because of the fact that this powered mobility program is so dear to my heart, and this is a real challenge of being able to find alternative ways to practice, we went down we decided, well, let's look at simulators. So we reached out to the McGill University, to Professor Philippe Archambault, and he was using a simulator that was used for adults, and we adapted it and modified it for children. So we looked at that, and what we wanted to see is, could you practice on a simulator and become proficient? as good enough? Is it better? We didn't want it to be better. We wanted it to be as good as, at least. It didn't need to be better. But it needed to give an ability for a child to become proficient, and that way we could give a simulator to many more children, because the simulator was a first view. It could be used on a home computer, a joystick that could be connected by the USB. So it wasn't very fancy or expensive equipment. So once we finished that and we found that it was viable and good, and we went forward, we decided, well, that simulator that they were using for adults, we were dreaming about, okay, maybe we can go forward and develop a different kind of simulator with authoring and personalization tools. And as you were saying before, the technology was getting better, and the different type of graphics. So we reached out and worked, and we got a grant from Promobilia, and working with Gravity Rehabilitation from Montreal. And we're developing now we're finished actually, a simulator for powered mobility for children. And in a matter of seconds, a therapist can develop the route that they want the child to practice, the lengths, the turns, going into a room, going out, going into classrooms, pressing a button, and the route is there. So that's something that's very exciting, and we're starting now an intervention study. And so that's something that I think that will make a real difference in the way that kids can practice and have it accessible, because the powered wheelchairs are not available everywhere. And
Naomi, mention the impact on policy that you've
right.
had.
Okay. So in Israel, powered mobility up until 2009 was given to children from 6 and above. Thinking first grade, that's when the child needs the chair. We were able to show through our clinical work at the hospital that children as young as 2 could become proficient drivers, and they changed, as young as 2, and they changed policy, and that age of 6 was gone away with. And so I have worked with kids as young as 2, and they've become proficient drivers, and they get chairs from the Ministry of Health. So that's great. That changed policy.
And also the fact that simulation was then counted as a route for achieving proficiency.
Yeah, it was recognized as a way to practice. You didn't have to practice on a powered wheelchair. You could practice on a simulator, and once those skills were transferred to a powered wheelchair, and then they could drive on a powered wheelchair, and they were proficient. So.
Wow. So can you tell us a little bit what it looks like when a child's in this? What are the obstacles or the challenges? Can you systematically manipulate them? I mean, you can change the route and everything, but
right. So this new simulator, you can design any route you want. So for example, and you can make it meaningful for the child. Let's say a child is practicing on a powered wheelchair, and he has his slot a week of a half an hour. But then with the simulator, for example, you can design the route again within 30 seconds of the route from the classroom, let's say
his particular classroom.
Yeah, his specific classroom, to going down the hallway. He needs to turn right and turn left. And we've seen that on the powered wheelchair, turning right is very problematic. So we'll put in a lot of right turns so that he'll have to master that skill on the simulator. And then you press the button, and then you're driving down that hallway. You can add obstacles of people walking around on the corridor. You can add stationary obstacles like a chair or something. And you can really design it so that it is meaningful for the child, and make it relevant.
wow.
Plus you have hard data, like you have outcomes, so that you can track changes in the child's ability from time to time. And also Naomi's been able to develop a model where she can predict which children are most likely to be able to become proficient drivers. which is also something that helps to make the case for funding allocations to people that otherwise would have been assumed not to be able to get that proficiency.
This reminds me a little bit of Danae Stanton's work in the late 90s. I don't know if you've
Yes.
seen her papers where
Yes.
it was about route navigation and teaching kids in advance, where like they modeled the school that the kid was gonna go to and taught them ways to go from the classroom to the bathroom, to the emergency exit, to water fountains and so forth. There's a cognitive element in this as well, I imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, I always think that this, I mean, it's very focused on achieving powered mobility proficiency, but there are many things related to orientation and navigation. This is definitely a combined motor cognitive tool that has many, many implications. If Naomi only had the time, I mean, she has told you about her 20 other projects, as well as the fact that she's in charge of allied health at the hospital, plus has, you know, whatever. I mean, you know,
That's the nature of VR people. I mean, we have our one great love, but then we have 150 other things that are second
she
place.
loves them all.
I love them all. That's the problem.
Wow, wow, that's incredible. What's it like now, interfacing with parents when you have to present them with an idea that we're going to use simulation technology, we're going to give your child a motorized vehicle, essentially, or any of the other applications that you do with children? Do you find parents are more accepting now that technology has a role in these kinds of things?
Related specifically to the current situation or in general?
In general, we're going to get to the current situation in about 2
Okay.
Well,
minutes.
I can tell you with the simulator, since, as I said, we have the program for lending out powered wheelchairs. Now, if they're number 20 on that waiting list, and I give them an option of practicing on a simulator saying, you're still going to be on the list and you'll continue up. But in the meantime, why don't you try this? We found that it's useful. And so, yeah, they're very willing. Because they do it at home, and it's very it's a game for the kids.
The kids find it fun.
Yeah. They find it fun, and it's a game for them. And what we're seeing, I mean, introducing technology, I think with the kids, it sometimes depends on what the diagnosis is. I mean, you see a difference between families with a child that has a neuromuscular condition, let's say SMA, compared to a family of a child with cerebral palsy, levels GMFCS 4 or 5. The SMA families will see that they are willing to adopt technology much earlier. For mobility, but for other things, because they really want to see. I mean, they understand that there are going to be limitations, and they want to give the child as much of an opportunity as early as possible. And what we're seeing sometimes with the families, necessarily, let's say, for example, with cerebral palsy, they want to try out all different types of things in therapy first before succumbing to the use of technology sometimes.
I'd like to also mention that we do have a very active research program in orthopedics and in neurology and in psychology. And so there are the children, we find that the families and the children themselves are very responsive to being asked to participate. We know when we develop different evaluation tools, for example, a child that's wearing a prosthetic limb, and how is he coping with it? And we've taken a lot of different assessment tools from abroad and translated them with great collaborations from around the world. And the family members are very understanding. They want to help their own child, but they also want to try to help other children in general who would then be also able to cope in a more functional manner.
That's fascinating. Well, before we run out of time, let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about the current situation that you guys are involved in, and the horrific. We all know the the horror story that's taken place there, how has that affected your work or the kinds of issues that you're turning your attention to, whether it's with children, which I think is an important thing that we should dig into, but also adults?
Well, I mean, I guess Nomi, you'll speak to this because you're in the administration and more than I am, of course. But we have the children that we're treating, but we also have our therapy staff and our medical staff and the support staff on all the different aspects. And each person comes with their own personal family history, and many of them right now are worried, they're concerned. Just before we started this podcast, I mentioned the fact that just yesterday, my 7-year-old grandson was on his way home from school when a siren went off, and he, ducked into an adjacent building and hid under the stairwell. And you wonder, what is the long-term effect? So you can't exactly leave that at home when you go into work. So I think we're all trying to cope and to understand that there are many sides to this story. But Nomi, perhaps you could address that more officially than I can.
Well, as we were talking about before, I mean, pandemic was one type of crisis, and now we have this, and how we cope. I mean, the hospital, it's open 24/7, and we have inpatient, we have outpatient, and we have to serve these children. I mean, we have to give them therapy, and they can't just go home. These are kids that have to be in the hospital. Those that can go home, of course, we'll let them go home during the crisis. But so it happened right after one of our holidays. So it was on a weekend, and kids that were home that were supposed to come back to the hospital didn't come back. And so we had to reach out and really change what we were doing, and immediately we started with the tele-rehab. Tamar was key in giving the support to the therapists and making sure that they knew what tools they had to use. And we had the tech support to be able to get all the rooms ready and all the tech, so that the therapists could start doing it with the kids themselves. And not everyone was open to therapy because they were busy with other things, and being able to say, okay, this is something that it's important and the kids need to do it, or they're home and they don't necessarily want to interact with others.
Mm-hmm. I'd heard from someone that there was challenges with healthcare staffing, because a lot of people that were reservists, that were nurses, docs, and so on, are having to go in and put in their service. Is that a challenge for any of your work, or at this point?
Yeah, it is. We have at any given moment either workers or spouses, maybe 30 or 40 people that aren't at the hospital. And we also have a multicultural staff at our hospital, and so there are challenges also for people coming from around Jerusalem, different neighborhoods that they have to get to the hospital, and seeing that sometimes it takes much longer to get to the hospital than usual. During the time we had school started today, but up until now we had a babysitting service, so that so that workers could bring their kids in and not leave them at home. And that was something that was really helpful for the parents, knowing that the kids were there, and that they could, if something happened, they could go to the kids and not and bring them down to the shelter.
And there are a few workers who are unable to come in, but they're giving teletherapy from their own home to the child at the hospital. There's a couple of, I don't know if I assume you're updated on that, Nomi, but yeah, so that's an interesting situation where the therapist is at home and the child is coming for their clinical rounds and getting one aspect of their therapy in that way. Like it's very eclectic.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been really in the last 10 years, a greater recognition of the impact of adverse childhood experiences on later physical and mental health. You know, some of the data shows that children that have been exposed to neglect, abuse, dysfunctional households, specific trauma at an early age have higher incidence of cardiovascular problems later in life, diabetes, a variety of physical ailments, but everything else along the way, you know, lifestyle differences, dropping out of school, substance use problems, in addition to anxiety, depression. There was a recent study out of Philadelphia with people who had scored high on the adverse childhood experiences scale when they had had an intimate partner violence event and they went into an emergency room, or just a stranger mugging, attack, physical assault, that when they followed them out 6 months, the people that had the higher number of adverse childhood experiences also had a higher incidence of PTSD at 6-month follow-up. And this has been shown a number of times that the predisposition for developing, you know, the clinical condition of PTSD following trauma in adulthood is directly tied to these things. What do you have to say? What are the children in Israel going through now? And is there a way that you can do, maybe not immediately, because sometimes you want to let the dust settle a little bit and then see which kids adapt in which ways, and then make decisions about interventions at that point. But what do you see this becoming an issue that we need to start paying early attention to?
You know, Skip, it reminds me a little bit about your work on inoculation. I think that's the term that you used when you would, I don't know if you still do it, but I remember when you would give people,
Service members
that were, yeah, like that they were first responders or people that were about to deploy, and you would show them, I think at the time it was virtual Iraq, and show them what they were going to encounter or could possibly encounter as a way of prepping them, priming them, perhaps, for the adversity that had not yet happened.
And teaching them skills. We would put them through this, a
Yeah.
customized obstacle course. So a narrative-based story where we called Strive, Stress Resilience in Virtual Environments, where they were actually with a virtual squad and they had to confront at the end of a 5 to 7 minute episode a bad event that was typical of the, you know, kind of the things that they may see. And at the end of going through that event and having that emotional reaction to it, which we actually documented with heart rate variability data, we had a mentor walk into the virtual scene, a virtual human, and walk people through coping strategies, whether it was simple things like breathing exercises or cognitive reappraisal, CBT kinds of things, dealing with grieving, and so on. And, you know, I wonder if that is an approach. I don't know. That was, you know, we could make the case for that with service members that were going to be going to war. We know they were going to have exposure. Is there something else that we can do maybe with children? Like, you know, the work you always hear me talk about with Jessica Stone's work with the play therapy app, the virtual sand tray, where you can give children a representational way of talking about trauma, talking about their experiences. You know, I'm wondering if there's some place for that.
You know, Skip, the latest game in my neighborhood is children trying to mimic the siren sound. So they're obviously being impacted by it, you know, and I think that there's something to be said. And I think this is one of the reasons why, you know, we want to continue this conversation with you to get some insight into perhaps somehow ways that we can respond in anticipation that things like this will affect it. And unfortunately, none of us know how long this is going to continue. You know, things are, to some extent, as Naomi said, kids are now back at school, and whoever can come as a child for therapy does come to the hospital, but we're by no means at a normal level of work, and certainly not psychologically, any of us.
Yeah, well, you know, Jessica is actually working with a group of Ukrainians on a project. You know, this has been going on for the last year and a half, and you know, it's basically a petri dish of trauma over there. There was a recent study showing 3 or 4 Ukrainian refugees that had left qualified as being at a level of depression, anxiety, or PTSD that would be something we would diagnose. But the children that are going through this, and just even if they haven't seen blood and guts in combat, that the sirens, the hearing the stories,
Yeah.
And kids often don't have a way of putting it into words, what they're feeling. And that's one of the key things, I think, in trauma-focused therapy, is to help a child to be able to tell their story, and to have a well-trained clinician be able to help them process it. Because a lot of times kids will take blame on themselves for things that they had there's no responsibility for.
Yeah, we have the psychologists at the hospital that work with kids that have either TBI or an accidents, unintentional injuries, and acquired injuries, and talking about what happened to them and giving them all different ways to be able to express themselves. So the psychologists have, we have art therapy, we have music therapy, we have drama therapy. Every child can find the way that they can best express themselves to be able to talk about what they're feeling.
Experiencing.
So you have to try and figure out which is the best way, what's the best way to try and let the child express themselves, because some will talk, but a lot of them won't, and some through talking, through playing. And so you really have to have a very large toolbox or sandbox to try and let them express themselves. And I am sure that going forward, we're going to have many, many children that are going to need therapy.
Yeah.
Wow. Any quick closing thoughts? I always have one question. It almost seems tawdry to ask this in light of what we've just talked about. But I always like to ask participants, if you had 2 years and unlimited funding, what project would you want to take on? No, money's no object.
For me, Skip, money is not really the be all. Like I would not. I like money on many levels.
No, but it's not about your pay, but it's about having a resource.
No. I know. I like money for my pay too. I mean, I would like to have enough money to hire all the people that we know, the research assistants, the coordinators, really the wonderful funding that we got a couple of years back from the Helmsley Foundation to be able to develop our research center, so those are important things, as you know. I mean, you've been so well funded over the years, but for me, buying a lot of technologies is not the solution. It's really having the people, and even going the simplest routes, and just having the time to try it out, to do a lot of iterative prototyping, so that you do a demo, you try it out, you see what works, and then you improve it, and then you go back and you do it again. And just having the luxury of the time. I think that's what I would want the money for, to fund the personnel and to have the wherewithal that you don't have to stop every month or two to write another grant proposal to get the next funding. So for me, that would be the major wish I would have.
I would like a couple things. I'm going back to powered mobility. Although there is now one company doing powered mobility via eyes, it's still eye gaze. It's still very, very expensive. So that's one thing that I would like to enable children to be able to access powered wheelchairs using their eyes. Another thing, I'm going back to the simulators. When we started the program with the project with gravity rehabilitation, I really wanted to be able to take a camera and take a video of the route that I want, press a button, and have that route and environment in the computer. So that's where I would like, go like that and have it. And so they said, well, we're not really there yet. And I would, I want something concrete so that I can just make some changes. But I totally agree with Tamar. I mean, having the opportunity to have the people to help out is very beneficial.
Yeah, people don't realize, how expensive it is to actually do this kind of research and development, aside from the tech development.
Yeah.
When we have to write a grant, we have to put in money for the tech on top of all the things that everybody else has to put in when they do a standard clinical trial without any
Yeah.
tech.
Yeah.
So
But
it's,
you guys have a huge overhead, Skip.
yeah. All right, let's go to the questions. I don't want to bring in any more anxiety.
Wow,
here.
this has been so interesting, the discussion here today, and it's so very interesting. I'd like to encourage anyone who is attending the webinar, if you would like to submit any questions that you might have through the Q&A, and if you're on YouTube, if you want to submit through the chat, now is your time to be able to ask Tamar and Naomi any questions that you might have. In the meantime, with everything that you've been talking about, Tamar and Naomi, I'm just curious about what are some of the application areas that you think will have the most impact moving forward?
Could I say one thing that I think will have less impact than people might think otherwise?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, there's so much hype now about AI and ChatGPT, all of those tools that are available. And I'm not going to go back to what I say about, in 5 years' time, like I said about robotics. But I'm a strong believer that everything will come its time, but we get so taken up by the hype cycle, where you get all excited about new things as they come out, and then you get very disappointed because they dip down again, and eventually you come to this balance plateau part of the curve, which is where I think we should be in clinical adoption. So I guess I'm saying is that I think we should keep very aware of the hype that very often does not bear much fruit. And so before we get too excited about all of the things that, and I'm not saying that they won't eventually happen in terms of AI. And I know that Skip was one of the pioneering people in terms of what you've done with, virtual humans and the therapist responses and everything. So it's there, but I guess I would have a plea for more caution in terms of really what is going to be the next hit. Most of us are not either Henry Ford or Steve Jobs in terms of being able to really know what's going to, be the faster horse, as in the car, or be the personal computer as it became, or the smartphone as it became. And so, I think we have to be have a lot of caution and a lot of restraint, even though we get excited, as we started off the conversation by how things excite us, but we have to be cautious about it as well.
I think that
Very good words there, yeah. Naomi?
I would like to see BCI going forward, the brain computer interface, for the kids that are so complex that accessing the technology or accessing their world is really, really hard. And we've done a little work and some collaborations. I think it's very far away still, but very far away. But I would like to see that get closer quicker.
And what do you think is needed to move that forward? Is that money? Is it more brains?
Money, time. Sometimes you just have to wait for the technology to be ready. If you recall, there was a Super Bowl commercial that was done back when Chris Reeve was still alive, about maybe 20 years ago by now, which showed him getting up and walking to accept his award, even though he was paralyzed at a very high level. He was like I think he was a C3-4. And I got numerous emails asking for, can I have the device that Chris Reeve used? That they didn't call him Chris Reeve, they call him Superman, because that's what he was famous for playing as an actor. Can I have the device that Superman uses to walk? And they didn't realize that the thing was a virtual reality simulation of him walking. And so we have to just be very careful of what not to do a hard sell about what's really feasible yet, but hope and be aware and anticipate. But BCI is a great example of something that it's been around for a long time, and people are working very hard, and I laud them. But it's so hard to get it working in anybody's real time.
Well, Tamar, this may be a case where an AI element may be useful in being able to, once you have sensors that aren't going to be infected easily, that are in the brain, that can learn brain signals and be trained with an AI program to be trained to take those signals and actuate, whether it's a prosthetic arm or leg. We're still a long way away from it, but maybe that's one area where AI is not just we'd like to have it. It's probably going to be the solution for transducing brain signals into signals that actuate something in the outside on the person's body, whether it's a muscle group or a prosthetic device.
One other thing that occurs to me is I think even more feasible within our own time is the whole access to data, large amounts of data, like data lakes. That's one thing that our hospital is working on, as well as many other locations. So that we can really be able to, ask a question and see what's been done and who responded to what, along the lines of what Naomi's they've been able to do with her prediction models in terms of who is most likely to become proficient at wheelchair driving, but on a much larger scale. And I think this is helpful.
Can you, anybody want to share? Have you used ChatGPT to get a jump start on writing a paper or a report or anything?
I had to write up a little abstract about one of our webinars that we had, and it did a beautiful job. So
I had to write a like a speech for the early career award that I got, and I was looking for closing remarks or something on virtual rehabilitation. And I mean, I was so excited because it came out. What did it come out with? It came out with quotes from Tamar and two others of the people that started, and it was like, wow.
One was great.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, Burdett. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Greg Burdett. Yeah. I think, ChatGPT is sort of a prosthetic device for older brains where we've got all this knowledge, but we've got so much knowledge. It's hard to organize it and keep track of it. You punch in a question, give me 10 fundamental reasons why simulation technology could be used for people on the autism spectrum. And you get your giant lists, and it's like, oh, I forgot about that one. Oh, yeah. And cut and paste and edit. You always got to have the human in the loop to.
Well, Skip, maybe one of your future conversations in a podcast should be with ChatGPT. You don't need us.
It wouldn't be as much fun, but
I think it would be
want to try that.
Good. Just one last question for each of you is, what advice would you have for others in the field or who want to go into this field? Any advice that you would give?
Naomi, you want to go first?
I think that that you have to be willing to try out all the technology. I mean, you can't be at an arm's length. You have to really want to try everything out, because if you try it out, then you can convince your patient to use it because you've tried it out on yourself. And so that's why I think the connection between clinical and research is you need to have that connection and not only be on the research side if you want to try and get people to use technology.
For me, it's mentors and mentees. And like I'm with my mentor here in Skip and a mentee in Naomi. Like it makes you feel like you're on a continuum where you're never alone. You get help when you need it, and people give it, and then you pass it forward, and you give it when you can. And it makes the whole thing so much better because you're not trying to solve problems that someone else has been challenged by. And you feel that there's a point to what you're doing because someone will take it forward.
Thank you.
I would say-
That's great. Yeah.
May I add my 2 cents on this. I think
Yeah.
we've got to be
That's
able to not be afraid of making mistakes, that you learn as much from your mistakes as you do from your successes, maybe even a little bit more. And now when I do outside consulting and people are interviewing me for a job, whatever, I say, you're paying me not for my successes, but you're paying me for all the mistakes I've made so that I can maybe help you prevent making those same mistakes.
Yeah.
Oh, good words of wisdom there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining this event in the Tech Meets Mental Health series. I hope you've learned from our amazing speakers today, and I want to say thank you to Professors Weiss and Gefen. That was so great, everything that you shared with us, and we appreciate it so much. And again, thank you to our host, Dr. Rizzo, who always keeps the conversation going and keeps it very lively. So thank you so much. For our
Thank
audience,
you.
the video recordings of this event will be available on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to share it with anyone who might be interested in the topic. We look forward to seeing you again at our next event and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. Thanks, Tamar.